Hello, welcome. My name is John Buck, and I am the president of the Stroudsburg Sourland African American Museum. The museum is located in Montgomery Township on 189 Hollow Road in Skillman, New Jersey. The museum is housed in the former Mount Zion African Methodist Episcopal Church. The church was built in 1899 on land donated by the True family. These are a founding African American family of the Sourland Mountain region. So welcome, come in and join me as we take a step back into history.
Soon and very soon, we are going to see the King. Soon and very soon, we are going to see the King. Soon and very soon, we are going to see the King.
Thank you for visiting with us at the Mount Zion African Methodist Episcopal Church in Skillman, New Jersey. My name is William Stives, and I have been described as a patriot and a devoted Christian. Historians have said that my wife Catherine and I were two of the earliest, if not the first, African American settlers to this area of the Sourland Mountain. When I was 18 years old, I joined the Continental Army as a fifer, and 5 years later, I was discharged as a private. I served in many battles and received the Badge of Merit for my 5 years of service, the equivalent to the Congressional Medal of Honor. And if you look closely at my discharge papers, you will see that they were personally signed by General George Washington. 6 years after my discharge, I married Catherine Van Noy of Somerset, New Jersey in 1789 in Sourland on Mountain Church Road. Catherine and I had 10 children together, and by 1820 we owned 22 acres of Sourland Mountain land. You know, there's a mystery that remains about me to this day. No one knows where I was laid to rest. Some people claim I was buried at the Old School Baptist Church in Hopewell, New Jersey, but there's nothing in their records to prove it. And if I was, I would have been placed away from where the white folks were buried. Because as a black man, though a member of the church and a decorated Revolutionary War veteran, I couldn't be buried in their section. Some of my white descendants didn't find this out until a couple of hundred years later. And here's another mystery about me. To this day, no one knows where I came from before I joined the Continental Army. Was I always free? Who knows? I guess you can say my life started on the Sourland Mountain with Catherine, my children, and my grandchildren.
Sourland Conservancy is a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to protect, promote, and preserve the unique character of the Sourland Mountain region. In 2011, the Sourland Conservancy held a fundraiser and applied for a grant from the Montgomery Landmarks Commission to restore the building. And then in 2014, Bev Mills and Elaine Buck, who had been doing historic research on the African American history of the area, they wanted to share the story. They wanted to share their research and let people know about the important story that they were uncovering right here in the Sourlands. And so the Sourland Conservancy partnered with the Stroudsburg Cemetery Association on a project, the Stroudsburg Sourland African American Museum. And now what began as a Sourland Conservancy project has become its own nonprofit.
The mission of the Stroudsburg Sourland African American Museum is to tell the stories of the unique culture, contributions, and experiences of the African American community in the Sourland Mountain region. The Mount Zion AME Church is a wonderful example of a small rural African American church, and it's really one of the few in New Jersey that's in such good shape. As you can see, it's a simple wooden structure with a gabled roof, and we have spent some time restoring both the outside and the inside of the church and plan to do some major restoration in the next several months.
We are so fortunate to be able to partner with Montgomery Township and the DNR Greenway Land Preservation Group to be able to acquire this beautiful land behind us here, of which an acre, just over an acre, which is designated for our educational cultural center of the Stroudsburg-Sauerland African American Museum. And we're just so grateful that we are able to be able to have this space.
We just had a meeting with the architects, Mills and Schnoring, and they have provided us with details. First on the restoration of Mount Zion, the church building, and then they'll be moving from that to the master plan for the site that's owned in common by Sourland Conservancy and Stroudsburg-Sauerland African American Museum. They'll be working on elements including an education center, an exhibition space, and office space for both organizations.
I think one of the first things that you will experience when you visit the museum is that you will learn about the African American story, which largely goes untold. This is a group of people that has been here since the colonial time. These are people that have been here before the United States was the United States. Because I think it's really important that people understand that New Jersey, along with the original 13 colonies, was a slave-owning state. All the underpinnings of this region was based purely on slave labor and free labor. By the mid-1700s, there was roughly 12,000 slaves in the state of New Jersey. Somerset County had roughly around a couple thousand slaves. They were considered a slave for life, and it wasn't until the 13th Amendment that they were able to be totally freed in the eyes of American law.
They had the same codes that they used in the South to keep their enslaved people under control. For instance, you would not be able to leave the plantation that you were on without a pass, and you couldn't own land. And if you did own land, you couldn't pass it down to your family. So all of these things were done deliberately to keep black people oppressed. New Jersey's black codes started in the 1700s, and I'll tell you what, it still affects us to this day.
The image of the slave ship Brooks is what we have as our first panel as you enter into the museum. I think that it's so important for people to stop and actually take that in. How many bodies can we squeeze into the least amount of space? It's so incomprehensible that anyone could survive this voyage, sometimes for weeks, in that kind of condition, sometimes only inches apart from one another. Slaves that came to the northern states usually came via route of Long Island. Some of them came by route of Philadelphia even. We see that as some of the large ships would dock, smaller ships would take them right up the Delaware River. We have newspaper articles that announced that there was going to be slaves for sale. It was an advertisement for human beings.
There were slaves in the Sourland Mountain area that worked on the peach orchards. There was said to be upwards of 4 million peach trees in our region, and the enslaved Africans would work on these peach orchards. And really they were owned by the prominent families in this area. You can't really total how many slaves that we have in our area, but we do know the names of some of the enslaved people, and some of them were right here at this church. They were the people that founded this church. The enslaved people that worked on these farms, they needed a place of their own to worship because they were being taken to church by their masters, and then they'd be separated. Keep in mind, Richard Allen was the original founder of the AME. And so he actually was in our area, and when he came to this area, he did a lot of preaching, and he was here for about 6 months in the Pennington area. And then after he leaves, that's when some of these churches started popping up, the Bethel AME Church and this Mount Zion Church here in Skillman.
We thought it was important to mention the founding family, the African American founding family names, for the mere reason that those names correspond to the white founding family names of this region. So we had a panel made explaining how that happened and explaining the relationship and how these names mirror one another and how it came from the legacy of slavery and how these people remained here in the mountain and made their homes here, and some of those people were the founders of this church, and how important it is to know this history and why this history is important, because when you connect these dots, you're able to see how we were all connected. For instance, the Grover family, the Trueheart family, the Nevius family, Blackwell, all part of the Hughes family,
the Harrison family.
Harrison, yeah.
The Jones family.
Yeah.
All those people lived right in this region. Some of them were the founders of this church.
Yes, like in my case, I can trace my fourth great-grandfather, Frost Blackwell, as an enslaved man to Andrew Blackwell. And the Blackwells are a very prominent family. That name, there's still several descendants of the Blackwell family living in the region today. And Frost Blackwell took on the last name of Blackwell. Frost was his first name, and that was very common for African Americans who were enslaved to take on the last name of the family who enslaved them.
A runaway ad would be for runaway enslaved Africans that have run away from the slave master, and they put a bounty out for them, and they wanted their slave back. And so in a couple cases for my family, the Waldron family, he ran away a couple times. He was really clever at how he would dress up and run away, and he spoke 2 different languages. So he really was very clever getting away. So I don't think life was too good for people. You just can't say that life was good for an enslaved person. It's wrong. When I was a young lady, we would come here and fellowship with this church, and I just can remember the music.
Walk in the light, beautiful light. Come where the dewdrops of mercy shine bright. Shine on.
And the patting my feet on the wooden floor, and the clapping, and just the spirit that was in this church. When I look at this church, I see God and His presence in this church, and I can feel the souls of the saints that made this church, and how happy they must have been to have their own place of worship.
Life for our ancestors definitely was not easy.
No.
We're talking about coming from slavery, from Jim Crow to segregation. You're talking about an existence in America that is not easy by any stretch of the imagination. And the only place that you could go on a Sunday where you could lay your burdens down was the church. That was the African American church, and this was one of them. So the Stoutsburg Cemetery has been part of the African American community in this region for as far back as we can remember. We don't really know exactly when the first bodies were buried there, but we do know that it was officially recorded in the Mercer County Courthouse in the mid-1800s, in around 1868. They had been burying people prior to that, but to make it legal, make it an official burying ground, as it was said in the deed, the Stoutsburg Cemetery Association owns it, And we've been managing it now. There's a few families have been managing it for the last, over 100 years.
But we have people buried there that were in all theaters of the war. So that would be the Civil War. We have the 10 to 12 known graves of the United States colored troops. And we're really proud of them.
Our Fund Development Committee is putting together a very important packet to individuals, businesses, foundations, corporations, grantors, with information about ways that people who would like to support our mission can help us.
We really are excited about the research that we have found. We want to share it with the people in the community here and with education, the schools. We want to put this information that we have found into our school curriculums.
Yes.
It's not just a local history. This is our national history. These stories happen all over the United States.
The Stroudsburg-Sourland African American Museum embodies the spirit of the Sourland Conservancy. It's a group of passionate people who are dedicated to telling the true story of the Sourlands.
The vision of having a center that will showcase our history, also in the cultural landscape and the ecology of this region, all of that combined in a building that people can visit and learn and just hear the whole story, how it's all connected, and how it's all been so vital for this region.
I hope you will enjoy the virtual tour of the Stroudsburg-Sourland African American Museum and our oral histories. And once we're finished building the Sourland Education and Exhibit Center next door, I want you to make sure you come and visit us. As longtime Sourland resident Albert Witcher would say, it's our heritage, you see. You've got to come from somewhere.